She didn't expect much, just silence, safety, and somewhere to bring her child into the world. But when 29-year-old Mara Lenning stepped foot into the Lakeside cabin she'd bought sight unseen, something felt too off. Beneath the porch, partially hidden by erosion and roots, was a tunnel old, bricked, and glowing faintly in the dusk. What lay beneath wasn't just forgotten history. It was a secret waiting to change everything. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories of quiet courage, hidden pasts, and emotional discovery speak to you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story might just unlock a part of your own. The gravel crunched beneath Mara's boots as she stepped out of the rental car, the lake still as glass behind her. She paused, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the car door like it might steady her thoughts. The cabin stood a few yards away, smaller than it had looked in the listing photos. Its wood siding faded to gray, roof slightly slumped like an old man's shoulders. But it was hers. Paid for in cash, no questions asked. She had nowhere else to go. She pulled her cardigan tighter against the breeze rolling off the lake, her fingers lingering on the bump beneath the fabric. 32 weeks. The doctor had said everything looked good. Physically, at least. Emotionally, Mara had been adrift since Boston. Since Caleb. Since the night she locked the door behind her and never looked back. The cabin's front steps sagged under her weight. The key stuck in the lock and needed a sharp jiggle before the door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of pine, mildew, and something faintly sweet like apples long since rotted. Dust motes floated in slanted beams of late afternoon sun. A chipped enamel sink sat in the corner. One chair, no curtains. The place had been empty a long time. Still, it wasn't the silence that unnerved her. It was the way the floor felt slightly uneven. Tilted, like something had shifted beneath it. She spent the next few hours unloading what little she'd brought: 2 suitcases, a box of books, a battery lantern, a worn photo album, and a single-framed ultrasound. No cell service, no Wi-Fi. Just the sound of the wind rustling the trees, the occasional splash of fish breaking the lake's glassy surface. At sunset, she stepped outside to breathe, sinking onto the front steps. That's when she noticed the patch of earth, just to the right of the porch grass pulled back, soil disturbed. It looked like something had eroded recently, maybe a small landslide or a long-forgotten burrow. But it wasn't natural. Not entirely. Stone peeked through the dirt, curved, arched, like bricks, weathered and worn. A strange kind of tunnel mouth, half buried, half exposed. Curious, she edged closer, boots slipping slightly on the incline. The air near the tunnel felt warmer. Not hot, not exactly, but like the den earth was breathing. A soft, damp warmth that rose up her legs and curled around her chest like steam from a forgotten teacup. She knelt, fingertips grazing the brickwork. It was old, hand-laid. She could see marks, not carvings. Not yet, but the fingerprints of whoever built it, pressed into the mortar like ghosts. Mara blinked slowly, heart steady in her chest. It could be nothing. An old drainage culvert, a root cellar collapsed by time. But something in her belly, not the baby, something deeper twisted gently. She whispered aloud to no one, "What the hell are you?" And the tunnel, silent and ancient, whispered nothing back. The next morning, the fog was low, and the lake had disappeared behind a curtain of pale mist. Mara stood on the porch with a chipped mug of instant coffee, staring at the exposed tunnel entrance like it might vanish if she blinked long enough. But it was still there. Even more visible now, the dew pulling back the earth like skin peeled from bone. She set the mug down and grabbed the garden spade she'd found in the shed out back. Her legs ached from sleep, but curiosity was a louder voice than caution. Digging was slow, the soil was damp and clung to the tool with stubborn fists. But after 20 minutes, she uncovered enough to confirm her suspicion. This was no accident of nature. The arch was perfect, laid stone, covered in a moss so fine it looked painted on. And there, tucked near the top of the arch, was a sliver of old wood like the remains of a door. She sat back on her heels, heart pounding. Who builds a tunnel under a lakeside cabin in the middle of nowhere? The rational part of her said to call someone. But who? She had no neighbors, no reception. And besides, it didn't feel threatening. It felt intentional. Like it had waited. Like it wanted to be found. She spent the rest of the day clearing debris, mostly fallen twigs and old planks, revealing a narrow entryway just big enough to crawl through. When the last board came free, a rush of warm air rolled out, earthy and rich, like the breath of something long buried. She leaned in, holding her breath, eyes adjusting to the dim. There was no sound. Just the faint smell of smoke and something older, cedar maybe, or myrrh. Something sacred. By late afternoon, she was sitting cross-legged at the tunnel's mouth, fingers tapping against her knee. A flashlight lay beside her, the kind with a crank she could wind when batteries failed. She hadn't gone inside yet. Not quite. But it pulled at her like gravity, like hunger. And still, the strangest part wasn't the tunnel itself. It was how calm she felt beside it. Her baby kicked then, a soft flutter against her ribs, like a nudge. Go, it seemed to say. She stood, wiped dirt from her hands, and picked up the flashlight. She clicked it on and stepped into the dark. The walls were smooth, worn by time. A few feet in, the temperature shifted cooler now, but not cold. The beam of light caught grooves in the stone. Not tool marks, not erosion. Writing. Carved. Careful. Deliberate. A single word, etched into the curve of the wall. Return. Mara stood frozen in the narrow tunnel, the flashlight trembling faintly in her grip. The stone wall in front of her was cool, smooth, and unmistakably deliberate. The word return seemed to pulse under the beam of light, as though the stone itself still remembered the hands that carved it. She reached out, tracing the grooves with her fingertips. The letters were shallow, but defined. Recent? No. Too much dust settled in the etchings, too much age in the mortar around them. Behind her, the entrance to the cabin flickered as morning light shifted through the trees. Ahead, the tunnel curved gently downward, swallowed by shadow. She should go back, finish unpacking, eat. Rest. Instead, she stepped forward. The air changed as she walked. It smelled of damp ash, old soil, and something floral faint but distinct, like dried lavender, tucked inside an ancient drawer. Her footsteps echoed softly off the curved stone ceiling. Dirt crumbled beneath her boots. Somewhere deeper within, water dripped steadily, each drop landing like a heartbeat. The tunnel widened after about 30 feet. The ceiling arched higher overhead, and the walls bore more markings, not words this time, but shapes. Spirals, lines crossing like constellations, small handprints, some no bigger than a child's. Others large, more forceful, fingers pressed deep into the clay before it hardened. Mara lifted the flashlight, heart tight in her chest. The markings stretched along both walls, then faded around a bend. She followed, slow, listening to the soft hush of her breath and the steady thump of her pulse. The floor dipped, and she caught herself on one hand as her boot slid against wet stone. The flashlight beam bounced wildly before steadying again, and that's when she saw it. A wooden door. Or what was left of one. Half-rotted, leaning against the far wall as if it had been forced from its hinges long ago. Iron nails rusted to orange stains. Just beyond it, a small chamber opened no bigger than a bedroom closet. Inside, remnants of something that once mattered. A metal lantern, its glass cracked. A wool blanket, moth, eaten and stiff. A torn satchel collapsed, like empty skin. And beside the satchel a box. Wooden. Square. Carved with a symbol she didn't recognize. A circle split by a vertical line, flanked by two crescent shapes. The lid was sealed shut by a tarnished latch. Her breath hitched. She moved closer, slowly, as though any sudden movement might wake the stones around her. Kneeling, she brushed away dust, lifting the box with both hands. It was heavier than it looked. Something shifted inside. A whisper of fear threaded through her calm, but she didn't put it down. From somewhere behind her, a faint sound rose like wind, but colder. She turned. Only darkness. She swallowed. Then, Holding her breath, she flicked open the latch. Inside the box lay 4 items, each carefully placed as though waiting to be found. The first was a tarnished key, long and thin, with teeth cut in a strange, uneven pattern. The second, a ribbon pale blue once, now nearly gray tied in a loose bow. Beneath it, a stack of folded letters, edges brittle from time, and at the bottom, resting like a heartbeat, was a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked, brown, and stained by what looked like water and smoke. A single initial was pressed into the front, L. She held it in her lap for a long moment, steadying her breathing before she dared to open it. The first page crackled at the seam, ink faded, but still legible. June 3rd, 1942. If you are reading this, I hope you came willingly. I was not given that choice. Mara's throat tightened. She turned the page. My name is Lark Adler. I am 16. And I think I am going to die here. Her hands trembled. She read more. Lark wrote of the cabin above the same one Mara now lived in, describing its creaking porch, its crooked windows, the sound of loons calling across the lake at night. She wrote of war, of ration books, of her mother's silence, and her father's temper. And then, abruptly, the entries changed. There is something beneath us. I found it by accident when the roots under the porch gave way after a storm. Father says it was once a root cellar. But it is not. It goes deeper, much deeper. Mara could almost hear the girl's voice. Young, frightened, brave. She read on. Mother says the tunnel was here before the cabin, before the town. Father told me not to speak of it, but I hear things at night. Singing, like voices underwater. Mara shivered despite the warmth. She became aware then distantly of her own child pressing a small foot against her ribs, as if in response. Flipping through more pages, her eyes caught on an entry dated October 12th, 1942. I went down, today. I followed the singing. I should not have. Ink blurred after that, smudged as though tears had fallen on the page before it dried. She turned to the next entry but stopped. There were dark fingerprints along the bottom of the page, not old ink, not smudged pencil, something else, something like dried blood. A sudden crack echoed from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, like a stone shifting. Mara snapped the journal closed. Her breathing turned sharp fast. She clutched the box to her chest and back toward the entrance, eyes wide, flashlight trembling in her grip. She didn't run. But she didn't turn her back on the dark either. Only when she reached the daylight did she finally let herself breathe. And in her arms, the journal seemed to pulse like it too, had found its way home. Back inside the cabin, Mara sat at the small wooden table by the window, the journal open before her. The lake outside shimmered with the soft light of morning, peaceful, unaware, steam, curled up from the mug of tea she'd forgotten to drink. Her fingers hovered over the journal's fragile pages, as if afraid to press too hard and erase history itself. She turned back to the entry she had stopped at the night before. The dried marks on the paper had darkened with age, but the shape of the words remained clear. Lark Adler, 16, trapped between a world at war and a secret beneath her feet. Mara read on. October 14th, 1942. I hear them again. Not singing this time. Whispering. My name. Over and over, like wind through a keyhole. I told Mother. She didn't believe me. She only pressed her hand to her belly and said the world had enough ghosts without me searching for more. A chill crept through Mara's spine. She turned to the next page. October 20th, 1942. I followed the whispers. The tunnel keeps going. There are candles down there, but they're not burnt by matches. The wicks are black but cold to the touch. At the end of the passage is a room. I don't know what it's for. There's a stone table, and on it a name carved. Mine. Mara pressed a hand to her stomach. Outside, a loon cried across the lake, a long, lonely sound that seemed to reach across time. She turned the page. November 2nd, 1942. Mother is sick. She says it's nothing. But I've seen the blood. Father won't let the doctor come. He says people will ask questions. I don't understand. I don't understand anything anymore. Mara's throat tightened. She could almost see the girl's small, pale, hair tied back with that faded blue ribbon. Alone in this same cabin, decades ago, listening to whispers from the earth. A final entry on the page. Caught her breath. November 5th, 1942. I think the tunnel is older than anything here. Older than the cabin. Older than town. Maybe older than the lake. It remembers things. And it wants me to remember too. Mara closed the journal gently, fingertips lingering on the cover. She looked at the door, where the tunnel mouth remained just beyond the porch, hidden by morning fog. Every instinct told her to burn the journal, seal the tunnel, leave this place. But something deeper, older, told her to stay. To listen. To understand. She placed the journal carefully beside the box, where the key and letters lay untouched. Then she whispered, more to herself than the room. Lark, what happened to you? No answer came. Only the soft creak of the cabin settling like an old house exhaling. And beneath it, almost too faint to hear, a pulse, a heartbeat in the ground. That night, the storm came. It didn't announce itself with thunder or lightning, just a quiet, steady rain that filled the dark with a soft, relentless rhythm. Mara lay in the narrow bed, one hand resting on her belly, listening as water tapped against the tin roof like fingertips drumming. She should have been asleep. But her mind replayed Lark's words on a loop. The tunnel remembers things. She turned onto her side, grimacing slightly as the baby pressed against her ribs. The wind sighed through the cracks in the window pane. She closed her eyes and dreamed. She was standing in the tunnel, alone. The journal in one hand, the key in the other. Candles lined the walls, burning without flame, their wicks black, like Lark had written. The tunnel felt alive, breathing. A low hum vibrated through the stone beneath her feet. Then footsteps, soft, bare. Behind her. She turned. A girl stood in the shadows, hair loose around her shoulders, dress torn at the hem, eyes wide, dark, and full of apology and warning all at once. Don't wake it, the girl whispered. Please. Not again. Mara tried to speak, but the tunnel shifted, groaned, like something beneath the floor was turning in its sleep. The girl stepped closer. You carry life, she whispered. It listens to that. A sudden, sharp kick from inside Mara's belly jolted her awake. She sat upright in bed, chest heaving, rain pattering softly outside. Her nightgown clung to her skin with sweat. The cabin was silent except for the storm. But somewhere beneath the floorboards, faint, like a memory, she heard it. A whisper. Not words. Just sound. Familiar. Like breath. Like someone exhaling a name they were afraid to speak out loud. She swung her legs over the bed and stood, steadying herself against the wall. Each step toward the kitchen creaked softly. On the table, the journal still lay open, but a page had turned. She froze. No wind blew inside. No window was open. Yet the journal now displayed a new page, and at the top, in looping ink, November 9th, 1942. My mother is gone, and I think the tunnel took her. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs, echoing the storm outside. She reached down, rubbing small circles on her belly. You're safe, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. Thunder rolled far across the lake. In the silence after, she heard it. Again beneath her feet, beneath the earth. A heartbeat. Not hers. Not the baby's. Something older. Something waiting. 3 days passed before Mara returned to the tunnel. She spent the time in a fog of chores and distractions, boiling water, sweeping the floors, rereading the journal, pretending not to listen for the whispers at night. But the pull never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, like a tether around her ribs. Something down there wanted to be found, or remembered. She waited for the rain to stop, waited for the wind to still. And then, just after sunrise, she packed a small bag. Flashlight, water bottle, protein bar, the key from the box, and a blanket for her knees. The tunnel greeted her like an old breath. Familiar now. Damp. Still. She moved slowly, careful of each step, keeping one hand on the wall for balance. The journal's final entries had left her raw. Lark's mother taken? Lost? The girl never wrote what exactly happened. Only grief, confusion, silence. And then, nothing. No final entry, no goodbye. Just the end. 50 feet in, the tunnel narrowed before opening into a second chamber one Mara hadn't seen before. This one was different. Colder. Drier. The walls smoother, carved with shapes she couldn't quite name, but it was the far end that held her still. A door. Stone. Tall. Seamless. At first glance, it looked like part of the wall. But as she stepped closer, she saw it wasn't solid. It had edges, barely visible seams, and it was covered in names. Hundreds of them. All hand-carved. Some deep and straight, others messy and frantic, as if carved in fear or desperation. A few repeated. One, scratched over and over in childlike loops. Lark, Lark, Lark. Mara reached out, her hand hovering just inches from the surface. The stone was warm beneath her palm. Not hot, not dangerous, but undeniably alive. Then her eyes caught something in the lower corner. A name she hadn't expected. Iris Lenning. Her breath caught. Lenning. Her name. Her grandmother's name. Iris had died when Mara was 10, a quiet woman with calloused hands and a silver braid down her back. She'd grown up just 2 towns over. Mara remembered vague stories about an old cabin, but never knew more. She knelt, heart racing, tracing the name with her fingertips. The carving was shallow, faint. Why was her grandmother's name here? A thought surfaced, unbidden. It remembers things, and it wants me to remember too. She stood and looked at the door again, this time with something new in her chest. Not fear, not yet, but ancestry. Blood. Memory. The key in her pocket felt suddenly heavier. She pulled it out, turned it in her palm. No keyhole was visible, but the center of the door had a faint impression. A narrow slit, vertical, worn smooth by countless touches. Mara stepped forward, raised the key. Then, without a sound, the door clicked and began to open inward. Stone, scraping against stone. And behind it, only darkness. And the faint smell of smoke. Mara stood at the threshold, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The door had opened without resistance, as if it had been waiting just for her. Inside, the air was thicker, warmer than it should have been, with the strange scent of burnt lavender and paper left too long in the sun. The chamber beyond was small. Square. No wider than 10 feet across. The walls were lined with shelves carved directly into the stone, each holding small bundles wrapped in waxed cloth. On the floor in the center was a wooden chest, nearly identical to the one Mara had found days earlier, only larger, more worn. Something about it made her throat tighten. She crossed the room slowly, every step deliberate. The lid creaked as she opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each sealed with twine, each addressed in a neat slanted script. Some were faded to yellow. Others looked untouched by time. A few had no names at all. Just the word daughter, or beloved, or for when you find me. Mara picked up the nearest bundle. Her fingers trembled as she untied the twine. The top letter was addressed to Iris Lenning. Her grandmother. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, but the words inside were still readable. My dearest Iris, if you're reading this, then you've come farther than I ever expected. The tunnel chose you, as it chose me, and others before us. This place does not forget. It stores what we bury, what we hide, what we fear. But it also holds what we love, what we couldn't say, what we passed down in silence. That is why you must keep it safe. One day, someone will need it again. Mara's eyes burned. The letter wasn't signed, but the paper smelled faintly of lavender and iron. She read another, then another. They told fragments of women hiding from war, from shame, From men who left or took too much, of children born in secret, of hope stitched into silence. One envelope held no letter, only a pressed blue ribbon. Mara closed her eyes. Lark. This place had been more than a hiding place. It had been a sanctuary, a confessional, a tomb of memory and truth. And somewhere along the line her blood had passed through it. The baby stirred inside her, a gentle nudge beneath her ribs. She pressed a hand to her belly, tears slipping down her cheeks. This wasn't just a mystery, it was inheritance. She carefully gathered a few letters into her bag, left the rest untouched. And as she stepped back through the stone door, the tunnel no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like a womb. A place where old stories waited, not to haunt, but to be born again. The rain returned with force that night, angry and wild. It slammed the roof like fists on a coffin lid, howled through the trees, and turned the earth outside to something thick and shifting. Mara sat by the window, journal open in her lap, one hand absently tracing the edge of the blue ribbon she'd retrieved from the tunnel. The storm wouldn't stop. The lake had risen. The shoreline, once a clear barrier, now kissed the porch steps. The tunnel she hadn't dared go back that day, not with the rain soaking everything. But it pulled at her, relentless as the wind. It wasn't fear anymore, it was knowing. The letters, the journal, the names carved into stone, they weren't just relics. They were threads of her own bloodline, hidden in the dark for decades, waiting for someone to unearth them. And now the earth itself was moving. At midnight, a thundercrack shook the walls. Mara jolted upright as a deep rumble echoed from beneath the cabin. Not thunder, ground, shifting. She grabbed the flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Rain soaked her instantly. The tunnel's entrance, once neat and arched, was now a jagged mouth. Part of the hill had collapsed, revealing more of the structure. Bricks scattered like teeth. The wooden beam that had marked its curve was split in two. Her instincts screamed to stay inside, but the pull, the tether, was undeniable. The baby shifted within her. Not a kick, a press, like agreement. Mara descended the slick steps, one arm protectively across her belly. She used the side of the porch for balance, boots sinking into wet earth. Lightning flashed above, casting the trees in white silhouette. Then came the whisper, not wind, not voice, but memory. Her grandmother's handwriting. Lark's words. It remembers. She entered the tunnel for the last time. Water dripped from the ceiling. The walls gleamed. The flickering light caught fresh cracks in the stone, small fissures spidering outward like veins. The deeper she went, the more the air pulsed. Not just warm, rhythmic, alive. The stone door stood open, groaning against its hinges. Inside the chamber, the wooden chest had shifted. Several bundles of letters were soaked, ink bleeding into unreadable smears. The floor trembled faintly, as if something far beneath was turning, or waking. Mara set down her flashlight and crouched beside the chest, grabbing the few dry letters that remained. She stuffed them into her coat pocket, then reached for the blue ribbon. A sound stopped her, not a voice. Not quite, but a cry. Sharp, infantile, inside the stone. She turned slowly toward the wall. There, in the rear of the chamber, where the stone had begun to crack under pressure, a thin sliver of blackness had opened like a birth canal in reverse. The wail came again. Brief. Fragile. She stepped forward, breath shallow, heart breaking wide. And then silence. The chamber calmed. The storm outside dulled. The earth stilled. And Mara dropped to her knees, whispering words she hadn't said since she was a child. Not prayers, names. Iris, Lark, and finally Mara. The following morning, the rain had passed. The storm was gone, as if it had only come to shake loose what needed to be seen. Mist hovered over the lake in soft ribbons. Birds returned to the trees. Mara stood barefoot at the edge of the water, hands wrapped around her belly, watching the light spill across the horizon. Her body ached. Her mind floated. But something inside her was deeply, finally still. She had made it through the night. She had made it through the truth. The tunnel, now partially collapsed, had been sealed at sunrise with old stone and fallen earth, not by force, not by fear, but by choice. She had taken what needed saving: the letters, the journal, the ribbon. The rest she left to the earth. Let it keep the rest, she thought. Let it hold what it has always held: grief, memory, and silence. Back in the cabin, she placed the journal and its companion items inside a wooden box of her own. Not buried, displayed. Above it, she hung a photograph of Iris, her grandmother, smiling in black and white, hair tied back, eyes full of secrets. Mara spent the next week rebuilding small things: patching the porch, repairing the fend, leaking roof, sanding the table by the window. She didn't rush. She didn't run. The baby was due in less than a month, and for the first time, she felt ready. One evening, as golden light filtered through the trees, she sat by the fireplace and opened a fresh notebook. No ancient ink, no trembling pages, just her hand, her story. She began with the words, "In the fall of 1942, a girl disappeared beneath the earth, but she left her voice behind. She rode until dusk, stopping only when the baby kicked." Mara smiled, whispered, "Almost there." Weeks later, she delivered a healthy girl in the cabin's back bedroom with a midwife from the next town over. No hospitals, no machines, just breath, blood, and light. She named the child Lark Iris Lenning. A tribute, a reclamation, a beginning. Years passed. The cabin became home, not a hideout, but a haven. Mara opened it to women who needed quiet, who carried their own secrets, who came from cities with shaking hands and silent histories. They stayed for weeks or months. Some never left. No one asked about the tunnel. But sometimes, when the lake was still and the mist low, they felt it. A hum in the earth. A reminder that beneath silence, stories wait, and that every woman carries more than one life inside her. Some we birth, some we remember, some we write down before the wind can take them, and some, like Lark, come back, not as ghosts, but as guides.